busy schedule we're happy that you took time on your busy schedule to join us. My name is Barbara Frey. I am an adjunct assistant professor with the School of Education at Point Park University, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. After 20 years as a senior instructional designer with Pitt Online, I retired last year, but I'm lucky enough to be staying on at Pitt as an instructional design consultant, doing some work with Pitt Online and doing some work with the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences. So my background includes a lot of years of teaching. I've been with the World Campus teaching online for 14 years, and I taught about 11 years with Colorado State University, their global campus. And Ray, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Ray Mancilla, and I'm the Assistant Director of Online Learning at the University of Pittsburgh within the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences. So we have a number of clinical programs that we're working to put online. In my spare time, like Barbara, I do enjoy teaching. So I do teach courses through Duquesne University in educational technology and instructional design, and like to partner with other institutions in bringing their programs online as well. Barbara and I have really enjoyed working with Quality Matters, and this is the third paper of our three paper white series, just going through the research that we've been doing over the past, we started this project in 2019, and here we are in 2021, wrapping everything up. So we're very excited to be with you today, and hope that you will also share our passion for digital accessibility. I love to do research, and digital accessibility is one of my favorite topics. In addition, Barbara and I love to learn about the professional development opportunities available to instructional designers. So that's another one of our concerns. So thank you. They've posted in the chat the resource where you can access the papers if you're interested in downloading. So without further ado, we can move on and talk more about the session goals and learn more about you, and continue our discussion of digital accessibility and professional development, which merges our passions for professional development and digital accessibility.
We have three broad goals, I guess, for today's session. First, we want to talk about how to analyze digital accessibility professional development needs and priorities for our QM member institutions. And second, we want to identify digital accessibility professional development training formats, including the audiences and the curricula. And third, we want to help you, and we also want to apply the next steps in training faculty and staff to implement digital accessibility practices in all of our online courses. So let's learn a little bit now about you. And if you would just maybe go to the participant icon, you can just raise a hand. Is digital accessibility training offered at your institution? And if it is, just raise your hand. If it's yes, please indicate so.
You can see the numbers are going up quickly. We're up to 55 out of 200 plus participants. Fantastic.
Yeah, we're not quite at half yet.
Right.
But many of you do have digital accessibility training at your institution. Well, maybe a little bit more than a 30% maybe. And then I'm going to ask another question. And for this question, I'm going to ask that you respond in the chat box for this. What are the training formats that are offered for digital accessibility training? For example, is it face-to-face? Is it webinars? Is it a knowledge base, just-in-time resources that you offer? Like, what are some of the formats that you have for your training? Online within the learning management system, face-to-face, webinar, online.
I see an LMS course as one option was provided.
Somebody says,
Workshops.
Oh, geez, okay.
So there's some asynchronous courses, some Canvas resources, quite a
Blackboard.
variety.
Yeah, Ally, I see Ally in there.
Oh, Kristen says there's a digital accessibility certification course. That sounds like a fantastic idea.
All right, then also in the chat box, would you respond to the question, what's the target audience? Or maybe I should say, who is the target audience? Is it, is it faculty? Is it instructional designers? Is it staff? Mostly faculty, I'm seeing. All university faculty and staff. And then the last question, can you think of what are some of the topics that are covered in this training? Universal design for learning. Yeah, very, very good.
Word accessibility, Canvas accessibility, PDF accessibility.
Oh, very good.
Alt text. ADA compliance. Great. Oh, captioning, one of our favorite topics. So a lot of formatting, PDFs and PowerPoints.
Media, yeah. All right, thank you. Well, it sounds like you have, many of you have a very strong foundation in accessibility practices already. Well, let's go ahead with this needs assessment and see if there's any other things that we can add to your toolbox. I want to start a little bit talking about the background. And if we go way back, this study originally started in 2010. And at that time, I was at the University of Pittsburgh, and I worked with a colleague by the name of Denise King. Denise was an instructional technologist. And we administered a survey to, at that time, QM institutions. And it went out to a little over 400 institutions. We had almost a 25% response rate. And we were asking about their accessibility policies and practices. So I don't have to tell you that there have been many advancements in technology in the last 10 years. So Ray and I wanted to explore what progress had occurred with course development practices within the last decade. So we administered a survey in October of 2019. And that seems like forever ago. And now the pre-pandemic, at that time, we weren't even thinking pandemic. It wasn't even a blimp on our radar. But we administered a survey, and we had, it went out to about 1,700 institutions, maybe some of you remember, and we got a response rate of about, it was about 16 or 17%. And out of the results of that survey, we did 3 white papers. So there's a series of white papers. That's the link that Barbara put in the chat for you. The first paper was November of 2020, and that was primarily on administration and policies related to accessibility. In February of 2021, earlier this year, we did a paper that was on course development practices. And now just last week, the 3rd paper was released, and that was the one that's on professional development needs assessment. So that's the focus of our whole presentation today. We want to talk about that 3rd paper. You probably know this if you are a QM groupie. Accessibility has been part of the QM rubric ever since it first came out in 2003, way before anybody was talking about accessibility. It was one of those standards, and it has only increased in importance over the last 18 years. With the 6th edition of the rubric, there are 7 specific review standards that all deal with accessibility. So we know that 7.4 focuses on student services, and then we have all of standard 8, and there are 6 specific review standards in standard 8, and 3 of those are actually 3-point standards. So they are extremely important standards that we all try to adhere to. There are 2 key terms that you're going to hear today, and I just want to differentiate how Ray and I use these terms. when you hear the word web accessibility, that means that we are trying to ensure that there are no barriers that prevent students from using our websites or interacting with our websites. We use web accessibility as a rather broad term. So we're talking about all aspects of our websites. We're talking about admissions and financial aid and athletics and support services in the library and human resources and every other part of the website. So that's not the audience we're really talking to. We're not focusing our comments to like web developers or programmers. We're focusing on the people who build the online courses. So when we use the term digital accessibility, we consider that a subcategory of web accessibility, and we are focusing on our online and hybrid courses. So for our purposes, we're talking about all the digital materials that we put into our learning management system, the multimedia that we put in, the Word documents, the PDFs, all those learning materials are the focus of this presentation and this study. So when we use the term needs assessment, we are looking for the gap. We're looking for the gap where we are right now and where we would like to be in the future. So the purpose of our study was to audit existing programs, what's out there. We want to review the gaps in the training. And then when we hope we can yield some insights for future initiatives of what we might consider offering in our training programs. And while there's a whole lot of information on the web about accessibility in general, there's not a lot of research that focuses on a needs assessment. And really, there's just two main studies that we could focus on. The first one was mine from 2011, and that's where we had about 25% of all QM institutions who replied that they were offering training at that time. So that's a relatively low number, only a fourth of all institutions. Just a few years ago in 2017, the WCET and OLC, the Online Learning Consortium, administered a survey about accessibility, and they found that up to 65% of institutions were offering some kind of accessibility training. So that's the good news. It has really increased in the last 11 years. So the significance of our study. Why did we spend so many hours looking at this, and why did we think this was important? First, ultimately, it's faculty who are responsible for ensuring that their online courses are accessible. Sometimes faculty think that this is disability services responsibility, but that's not how we see it. And actually, faculty are ultimately the ones who are responsible for interacting with the students, for facilitating learning, and it ultimately becomes their responsibility to practice the best practices in accessibility. So that was one significant consideration for this study. Second, we wanted to make sure faculty were equipped with the knowledge and skills to make decisions about accessibility. Faculty are experts, of course, in their discipline, the chemistry, the biology, the psychology, the anthropology, whatever it is. But very few faculty have much depth or much experience with accessibility practices. So that was another important consideration for us. We found that there are often barriers to faculty participating in professional development. This was noted in the research in several major studies that faculty just didn't have the time or the ability to take online training or face-to-face training. They found that the opportunities for training were limited. I know that the QM and OLC have accessibility workshops that can be taken online, but that even so, many institutions just don't have the money, and faculty just don't have the opportunities to participate in this kind of training. And then there's limited research on exactly what knowledge and skills faculty need when they are interacting with students who have disabilities. So that's why we thought this was important, and we were driven to spend our time doing this. I just said that it can be a challenge for faculty to participate in digital accessibility training. Some of the barriers noted in the literature absolutely won't surprise you. Some faculty are of the opinion that it's the responsibility of someone else at their institution, maybe disability services, or if they are lucky enough to have an instructional designer, they may see that as the instructional designer's problem. Time is a big challenge for faculty. They have many responsibilities, many committees that they serve on, and it's just always challenging to stay up with all the educational technology that's out there. So they have a lot going on. The workload demands are significant, whether you're an instructional designer, instructional technologist, or a faculty member, you probably have quite a bit on your plate. And no matter when you offer training, there is always going to be a conflict for somebody. You know, somebody is always in class and not able to participate, or it's, you know, not a day they come to campus or whatever it is, but there are always barriers. And there's little incentive. There are very few institutions that provide any kind of stipend or any kind of release time for faculty who want to participate in these professional development initiatives. The training formats, they vary. According to the literature, the training delivery formats vary in length, frequency, delivery, and pedagogy. So for example, we saw this in the chat. We saw some face-to-face, we saw some self-paced modules, we saw some just-in-time resources. I don't know, did we see any faculty communities of practice or mentoring programs? There might be some others that we didn't, that were noted in the literature, but not noted in our actual chat question. And for the curriculum, the existing accessibility training programs tend to focus on several different components, just some of the things that we found in the literature. Some of them emphasize disability legislation, like they might start out talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act or Section 504 or 508. So they might start out with, not only is accessibility an ethical responsibility, it is a legal responsibility. They might start out building awareness. I have seen several accessibility programs that actually start out with students doing little presentations, either through video or demonstrations of, for example, a screen reader. The curriculum might consist of sharing guidelines and standards. In particular, what I see the most is the web content accessibility guidelines, which is sometimes called WCAG, and that tends to be the standards that most people use globally, actually, when they're developing web content. There might be some content about inclusive pedagogy. What are the strategies that faculty are using when they are practicing accessibility practices? And last, designing for assistive technologies. And the reason this is important is because if you know a little bit how the assistive technology works, you can design your documents and your materials to be more inclusive. If you know how a screen reader works, for example, you can design your Word documents using styles, using a proper format for tables, and that allows the screen reader to read that document to the student more efficiently. Okay, Ray, I am going to hand it over to you now. And do you want to talk about our methods?
Yes. So as Barbara mentioned, this is part of a series. So some of the methods may be familiar to you if you have attended other webinars based on this topic. Our primary research goal here was to determine the digital accessibility professional development needs across Quality Matters institutions so that we could make comparisons between the 2011 survey and the current day. So that was our primary research question. This was one out of initially 5 questions. So in each of the papers, we were able to tackle a different research question. So what we did put out a survey. Many of the participants were identified through the QM database. So we sent this out to the Quality Matters coordinators at those institutions to voluntarily complete for their institution. We had different categories, so we collected information on the demographics. So you'll see some of the information here up here in our findings about who were the institutions. Were they 4-year institutions? Were they 3-year institutions? And so forth. What tools did they use to make the content digitally accessible? So that was part of paper number 2, as was course development practices. In this paper, we really, the research focused on asking questions such as, what is the role of QM in supporting digital accessibility at your institution? How can QM help? We wanted to know what kind of opportunities were available. Some of the same questions that we started you with. So of the institutions who responded, we had a 16% response rate. So we had 273 people participate. Almost as many people who are attending this webinar, which is fantastic. With educational research, you never quite make it into 100% completion rate. So we were happy with 16%. That was actually a pretty reasonable number for educational surveys. We had 209 participants after we took out all of the incomplete surveys. And of those who participated, you can see that 40% of people who replied were administrators of some kind. We had 36% instructional designers. Faculty were only 9%, and then we had some other classifications such as technologists or disability services specialists. So the data here really represents the perspectives of administrators, some faculty, and instructional designers. When we go back and look at who participated in our research here, we can see primarily 4-year institutions, followed by public institutions. So many of these were 4-year public institutions. We had a few 2-year institutions and very, very few technical or for-profit institutions. And then we also were concerned about the size of these institutions because that also determines resourcing for programming. So we did ask lots of questions as we were analyzing the data. We wanted to know about the type of institution and does the size matter in terms of offering opportunities or not offering opportunities. And we did not find anything significant there. So it didn't matter if you were at an institution of under 5,000 or if you were at an institution of over 40,000. The opportunities that were provided to instructional designers or faculty regarding digital accessibility were not mediated by the size of the institution. So that was an interesting piece. But you can see that most of the institutions who participated were under 5,000 enrollments. And what did we do with this data? We conducted a number of analyses, and what we ended up reporting on was just a fraction of what you really find. We had quantitative analyses that we did with SPSS, and we did some chi-square analyses of probability. We did some qualitative analysis, we did some coding, and we had many qualitative questions, and we'll share some of those findings as well. So we had multiple coders, and we did keep the code book for open and pre-structured coding. So this is sort of our analysis plan in a nutshell. And what did we really find? Going back to that research question, what are those professional development needs of the QM institutions? And getting started with that initial question of, is training available? And we found 76% of institutions were offering training. So regardless of the institution type, we ran a number of comparisons to determine this. Regardless of the number of online course enrollments, the majority of QM institutions were offering training. And as you can see, few reported offering no training, so around 20%. So there has been growth when we look at the 2011 survey. We do see growth from what Barbara and Denise King found. So training opportunities have become more abundant, and that is a statistically significant finding. When we look at the time between when the WCET survey was administered in 2017 and this survey in 2019, we've also seen a notable increase. So this is promising. There is heightened awareness of digital accessibility as a legal and an ethical responsibility. So if you recall, it was in the 60% mark that the WCET study found, and we have 76%. So there's been some growth. We were also interested in that question about who is the target audience for this. And you can see on this chart a comparison between the 2011 survey that is in blue and the 2019 survey that was in a gray. And we can see that there has been a shift, somewhat of a shift in the target audience. Faculty continue to be the most prominent group. So we see 70% of faculty training is targeted toward faculty, and then faculty developers, 23%. So those two audiences are very important when the institutions are promoting training. We also see instructional designers at 19%, and we believe that this could be because the instructional designers are delivering the training. So in many cases, the training is geared toward faculty, and the instructional designer or the faculty developer may be the provider. In the initial survey, 2011, we did not see web developers appear at all. So we see this as a positive that there is some digital accessibility training happening for web developers. And then we see this other category as well. And we think that these are other roles. For example, we did see OPMs and design firms come up in our data as well. So this other role is a very small percentage, but you can see that the audience is quite diverse for the training. And faculty are at the heart of that. And if you recall, these are instructional designers reporting, and mostly administrators and some faculty members reporting on this survey. Yes, Madeline mentions these could be librarians. And we know that our librarians in the other category, we know that our librarians are very familiar with digital accessibility as well. And when we look at training formats, how is this training being delivered? We see that 2/3 of participants were receiving internal courses or workshops. So online resources were 57%. So those are resources such as knowledge bases that Barbara had mentioned earlier. And some of you also talked about just-in-time resources. We see webinars were 32%. And external courses, we had provided examples on the survey. These external courses really relate to courses offered through QM, courses offered through the OLC and other online benchmarking organizations. So that's a relatively low figure to see external courses. Mentoring programs and communities of practice were even less frequent. So we see this 7% mentoring programs in digital accessibility. So we do see, based on across time, that there is less reliance on internal courses, because previously it was 90 to 95% of the training that was provided. And now it is 66% internal courses. So you can see there's a little bit of more diversification, and it could be because online resources are just more convenient and accessible to the individual as a self-paced activity or just-in-time learning opportunity. And we do know that we have seen an expansion over time from 14% to 29% in the use of external courses through organizations like QM. So that shows that, you know, participants are valuing the opportunity to explore best practices with other institutions. And someone mentioned the community of practice, having that opportunity to see how are you handling that at your institution. That's also why this study was so interesting to us, because we can see what's going on about across institutions and QM member institutions in this field of accessibility. So this is just a small activity we did ask participants in the study to rate the effort that it would take to perform these best practices for digital accessibility. And we asked them to provide this rating. If you're able to, in the chat, can you please rank just 1 to 5, or if you don't have time to rank all of them, which is 1 and which is 5, in terms of easiest 1 and 5 hardest for you in your role to perform as a digital accessibility practice. So if you could just type it in the chat, what you would rate a level of effort. 1, 5, 5, 1. Easy is 1 and 5 is the hardest. Someone has already been so kind to mention it is so much easier to proactively design materials that are accessible than to retrofit them. So we have descriptive hyperlinks as a 1, alt text as a 1, color contrast as a 1. Oh, we see a lot of captioning and table design as 5s.
Yeah.
Table design. Everyone says 5 is tables. Captioning keeps coming up as a 5 as well. Thank you very much. We understand captioning has been a challenge, and you'll see what the participants said as the most difficult and the most easily performed tasks. So in terms of the perceived effort, you will see that on the next slide that let's see, plain language and table design were really high priorities, using plain language and table design. So table design did come up as one of the more challenging practices where more professional development is needed. So I'll be showing you that. And also these same practices, they agree require high effort. And captioning, surprisingly, was ranked as a mid-range priority, but a very high effort practice. So many times as the professional, you have the knowledge, but you may not have the resources to do this at your institution. So if we're looking at these training priorities, we can see plain language, table design, and adding alternative text. Those are all high training priorities. This could relate to how frequently you need to put these into practice, or it could also relate to areas where people find there are gaps in their knowledge. So plain language, table design, alt text. And you can see at the bottom, keyboard accessibility, color contrasts. Some of you rated color contrast as minimal effort to do. You might already have great skills in that area and not require training. The training priority was not color contrast for participants, and it was not for keyboard accessibility, and everyone seemed very familiar with Quality Matters Standard 8, which is our guidepost for accessibility on the rubric. You can see that captioning and transcripts tends to fall in the middle. It wasn't a high training priority. And again, this could be not a relation to effort so much as you don't necessarily exercise control over that. That's a budgeting concern. There might be other elements or variables tied to that. And Maureen has put in the chat talking about Otter AI and some speech to text tools and ways of promoting captioning at your institution. So thank you for that resource. And we see that there.
Let me just interrupt you really quickly. There was some one who commented in the chat, and now I can't see it, but was just asking what is meant by the term plain language.
Oh, yes. Plain language is the use of familiar language. So typically it's active voice, concise sentence structure, so that students at any reading level could access the text. And that is not something that you can necessarily check for with a color contrast checker or any of the web accessibility checkers. You know, it really is a manual process. And so in many ways, that might be why it's such a high training priority, because it does require, you know, a human to be reading through and ensuring that the language is comprehensible and readable and so forth. We also asked all of the participants to discuss, oh, you're welcome, to discuss the Quality Matter contribution to the work of accessibility and what could Quality Matter do. And what we see here is that everyone says providing more training, so providing training in digital accessibility, to provide resources. And Quality Matters does have a sub-site on accessibility with multiple resources available. So continuing to enhance that. Some individuals talked about the rubric. So some felt that the rubric could be more specific in certain areas. Others felt like it didn't need to be so specific. So it was non-conclusive in terms of the contribution of the rubric, but we know that the standards do not require a lot of training on the standards necessarily, because faculty and participants said that they felt that that was not a high training priority for them, but it is an important tool for and guide for the digital accessibility work. And then others said that Quality Matters can continue to promote the awareness of digital accessibility. So events such as these are good examples of the role of Quality Matters in promoting digital accessibility awareness among professionals and practitioners. So these were some of the qualitative pieces that came out of our survey. So we may think to ourselves, what does this matter? What are our main takeaways, and what can we do knowing that these are the needs and the priorities? Well, we did find from the literature that it's very difficult for people to participate in training when they don't have the time, or they don't have the resources to participate. So if your budget does not allow. So at an administrative level, we can work to incentivize attendance at workshops or digital accessibility events, perhaps with a stipend or a workload reduction to address the issue of scheduling. So scheduling was a huge issue in the literature reported by faculty why they could not participate. We can ask administrators to integrate accessibility training into an onboarding program. So someone mentioned a digital accessibility certification. It would be very helpful to have components of that or an entire module from that move into employee onboarding so that new faculty do receive that foundation. So these are things that administrators can begin to put into place. If you are an instructional designer or a course developer of some sort, your role may be to develop and to facilitate accessibility programming on campus. So I do see some comments in the chat that institutions are adding accessibility into the summer onboarding for new faculty members. So that's fantastic. And I'm sure that the instructional designers and course developers are working really hard to develop those programs. So that's also the role of the course developer, and producing those on-demand, convenient, accessible training resources. So that might be the knowledge base, it might be an asynchronous course, it might be a downloadable one-pager that has information on a quick guide, how to check color contrast, how to add alt text. So these are on-demand training resources. That is one thing we're working on at the University of Pittsburgh in our accessibility initiative at the moment, is producing these online training resources for faculty and for other staff at the institution. And then faculty members can help guide the training agenda. Very few institutions have a clear curriculum. It's all over the map, and we see that there are priorities from our QM institutions like plain language or table design. One thing that you can do if you're a faculty member is share out those priorities that and what you feel are your training needs with those who train at your institution, so they can tailor the agenda, especially if you already have foundational knowledge, to be able to build on that knowledge. And then clearly participating in the professional development opportunities that are made available. I know that at our institution, we've had WebAIM come in and train. We've also had our faculty take some of the Quality Matters workshops that they've put out recently on accessibility. So there are lots of ways that you can participate in the culture of accessibility on campus. So these were some of our primary takeaways that could that could hit on each of the main stakeholders in higher ed. And we just wanted to have a little bit of an open discussion, and I'm going to allow Barbara to facilitate this, about what you see as some of the next steps at your institution. And there's some fantastic dialogue happening in the chat already.
Right. So if you would please go ahead and keep going in the chat. What are the next steps at your institution? What are the programs that you would like to initiate? Is there something that you have that you think could be enhanced? Like, what are you going to do next? Oh, mandatory training instead of optional. Maureen was first in. She was ready with that one. Creating the training, normalizing training. So requiring
Several
training.
say requiring training.
Oh, you're going to have a 5-credit course.
Oh, it's going to be a universal training initiative, building awareness. Someone says revising the old online courses. Courses always need revision.
You're going to create awards, perhaps some kind of badging program. Badging.
I think that's becoming easier with the features of our LMSs. We were using Mancilla Backpack for a while to do badging, certification, Credly badges, yes.
Christine asked the question, what does everyone recommend for incentives? Does anyone offer incentives? And if so, what are they? Yeah, QM training is, something that at least it's already developed. Conference registration fees could be a good incentive. Stipend. Yeah, stipend's always motivating.
Course releases.
Highlight the course on the QM website. Oh, a 40-hour online course. Oh, that for course design, and that would include accessibility. So that makes sense.
And advice for preparing conference presenters to design accessible presentations. Sounds like that's more of designing the PowerPoint, some of the same principles for designing PowerPoint and adding descriptive hyperlinks and adding alternative text to the images to make sure all of your slides have the title, getting into table design. And you can always run the PowerPoint accessibility checker, which is very helpful to flag some of the issues. And I see that they've also posted the professional development accessibility training list for QM in the chat. So that's helpful if you want to take a look at that. Yes, I see that that there are more formal roles in disability coordinators and digital accessibility and educational instructional technology. We've seen roles to the digital accessibility specialist role emerge at our institution. So that's always a positive step to have someone who is a point person that's spearheading the initiatives at the institutional level.
Another comment that we got was that for the institutions that offered accessibility training, they wanted a go-to person after the training ended. They wanted somebody that if, you know, they have a question down the road in 3 weeks, like who's the person that they would go to say, I'm stuck with this, what do I do?
Oh, someone mentioned here coordinating reviews, QM reviews, accessibility spotlights and checks on the courses. So these are all really concrete next steps. Yes, there's always the budgeting issue.
Yeah.
I see some commenting in there. Yes, unfortunately. That's always the case for captioning as well. That's why when we've thought about these papers, you know, we've always thought about the administrators, what is the role of all of the different levels of the institution? And it does start at the top with the point person. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do we have time to do some QA?
Are there any other questions that, you know, perhaps you didn't ask already in the chat box?
There is one question in the Q&A, and also somebody had asked for a listing of QM training specifically about certain types of accessibility training, and it would take a little bit for me to put that together. So I just asked that anyone interested in that can send an email to research@qualitymatters.org. And when we send out a follow-up email, probably it'll be this time next week, that'll include the recording. I can address that in the email as well. We can send that content.
Thank you.
So I do see a question in the chat about the analysis. If there was any analysis done to determine what extent the increase in institutions who are offering training may be related to the institutions being more likely to be interested in completing the survey. So we did not do any analysis to determine if the people that we really couldn't analyze if the people who were completing the survey were just more interested, but that is a possible explanation for the increase in training that these institutions who are offering training are reporting on the training. If we had a larger sample, we may have different results, but 16% as a response rate wasn't too bad for the educational arena. We did have a higher response rate in this survey than the 2011 survey. You might also argue that the QM institutions are a different population than the OLC survey in 2017. So those went out to OLC member institutions, but overall, the results between the OLC 2017 survey and the 2019 survey, they're pretty comparable. I mean, it only went up by 10%. So, you know, that wasn't necessarily a statistically significant difference across time, but we can see that things are moving in that direction. But we did not do any specific analysis to determine what came first, the chicken or the egg. But that's an excellent point. We see another question here about any recommendations on starting a professional development program for digital accessibility, starting a position with a very small support team, a small budget. So where is the greatest impact? This is an interesting question, Nancy. And thinking about the training priorities, I would say you want to start with the low effort practices, the things that are easy to implement. So for example, the exercise that we did, the needs assessment at your institution, maybe finding out at your specific institution, where do people feel like they need additional skills? What are they using on a regular basis? And we know that, things like the exercise that we did, adding alt text, how hard is that for you? Adding captions, how hard is that for you? And starting with that kind of that low hanging fruit. So, descriptive hyperlinks, everyone said, that's a really easy thing. That's a very quick change that you can make to improve the accessibility of your course. So, starting to develop training around those concepts, resources around those concepts. And you mentioned the small budget. One of the initiatives we have going on in our institution is just having experts in that area create one small one-pager that can be posted on the website for faculty to download. Hosting some resources online, having that just-in-time resource can be very helpful, and it can be done. It's kind of a one-time thing. You can revisit it over time and update, but it would allow you to do more if you don't have a huge budget. The first thing that our digital accessibility coordinator did coming to our institution was really an audit, a survey of every department and what was the technology being used, and were the courses accessible. It started running the You Do It tool, just looking at where were the major errors, getting a sense of the landscape. So that might also be something that you could do to prepare for training.
Nancy, I sometimes facilitate the QM addressing accessibility and usability workshop. And I know it's very, very common in that workshop to have a couple people who registered for it together from an institution, and then their responsibility is to go back to their institution, and it's kind of a train the trainer model, where then their job is to teach everybody at the institution what they learned in the training. So I don't know if that would be something that might interest you or not. All right, I think we've answered all the questions that I can see. Is there anything I missed? If we didn't answer it, would you post it again? Because maybe it just flew by too quickly. I did post the link again to the white papers. There's 3 white papers that, if you're interested, you can scan those, maybe get some additional ideas that, were more detailed than what we presented here today. It was a pleasure to talk to everybody. I'm glad we
provide our contact information as well.
We wish you all the best. I'm so glad that this is a topic that interests so many of you. Good luck. Have a good summer.
Well, let me provide the certificate and verification of attendance.
Okay, I should stop the recording, but